Good morning, everyone. I'm Rosemary Williams, and this is the beginning of a webinar series on liminal space and time. This morning, we're going to have a conversation with Jean Bolen, Katherine Collis, both of whom are very interested in liminal space and the concept and spirituality and how we might use that space to the betterment of our lives, humanity, and the globe. Jean is a Jungian analyst, an activist, an internationally known author and speaker. Katherine was former director of La Casa de Maria Retreat Center in Santa Barbara. She has spent her life working with the subjects of gerontology, spiritual psychology, human development, and of course, liminal space. Jean introduced me to the word liminal many years ago. Now it has become a word almost common in our language, although there may be a few that still wonder what it is we're talking about. We'll explain that and we'll talk about it and hope you enjoy the conversation. To begin with, Jean has a wonderful chime, a bell, and I'm going to ask her to ring it. It's a sound that unites the people that are listening to it. So we unite at a heart center in a way that is just very special and extraordinary. So you might want to close your eyes for a moment and just listen to the sound. Wonderful. Thank you, Jean, so much. And I'm going to ask you to begin the conversation since you were actually the one who introduced me to the word. So any thoughts you have that would like to take us right into liminal space?
I think liminal is a wonderful word that explains when we are in between what was and what next. And it's a word that is a Latin word from way back in times of Rome. And it translates into threshold. So when you think about stepping over a threshold, remember it was a whole marriage thing. The bride was lifted over the threshold and she went from who she had been, the maiden, the virgin, supposedly anyway, and then she was carried over the threshold and she became the married woman. And that threshold is, from the word liminal or limen, is where we are now all over the world. This is a pandemic time that we're in. Once the pandemic began, we couldn't go back to what was. And this phase in which the entire planet is being affected may last yet another year or longer. We don't know, but we know that we are in liminal space, crisis space. And the word crisis, to go from Latin to Chinese, in the pictograph draw it as a Chinese word, crisis equals opportunity and danger. So here we are in this liminal pandemic crisis time. Most of us are sheltering in place. Life is not what it used to be, and we do not know yet when it will end and how it will end. And we have an election coming up in less than 2 weeks, and that will be a major indication of what is going on in this amazing liminal space. Danger, opportunity, crisis. Now, I'm a Jungian analyst and a psychiatrist, so I usually see people in crisis. You only come to see a psychiatrist when you don't know what next. And it usually means a personal crisis. Your relationship shifts, something ends, or you learn about a betrayal, or who knows what, but it is a crisis, or you get you go to your doctor and you get a routine blood test or a routine chest something or other, and you find that you actually have something potentially serious. Now you are in crisis, or it happens to your child. Personal crisis is the times in which every single one of us probably will have at least a dozen major crises in our lives and each time danger, opportunity. And Rosemary, I love how it is that you put the word gift in the middle of this liminal time, because there is a gift. There's a gift of change. There's a gift of being, for a time, not knowing and receptive. And what I'm hearing in my own practice is that in this liminal time, which I am doing virtually, people are dreaming bigger dreams.
Right.
They have more time to dream. The alarm clock doesn't go off and you rush off to work like it, or if you really are in a pandemic sheltering in place, you don't do that. So you can wake up and think, and this is what I really am starting off by saying, please do this. If when you wake up, if you've had a dream, stay in bed a little bit longer and remember what was the dream, what happened, think about it. And then when you get up, jot it down. And a big dream might be on your mind the whole day. And you'll start to have a dialogue with that part of you that is, for example, tapping into feelings and talents and experiences that you shut down. And now it can come up and you can remember, reconnect. You know, every time we were made to don't think that way, don't be that way, do this, we shut down part of ourselves, we dismembered that part of ourselves. And now is the time to remember, reconnect, and grow into who we were meant to be. So that's the gift of liminal time. It's very painful, but giving birth to anything is painful. So if you can look at this time as a time in which you will birth, reconnect, remember, and grow into who you are becoming, then this liminal time is truly a gift. So that's my intro to the whole notion of liminal and gift. And
You're expanding my understanding. It's wonderful. I see it as a gift. I see it as a gift in so many ways. But I wasn't thinking so much in terms of personal transformation, but clearly it's that. Katherine, what are your thoughts?
Well, my orientation to liminal space comes out of my lifelong interest in transitions. And I think the key thing that brought me into this awareness was when I was pregnant with twins and was put on my back because they were trying to prevent a premature birth. And what happened was one of the twins was very healthy and the other was not. And even the doctors and nurses could come into where I was lying in the hospital room and put their hands over my body. And you could feel this energy of this one twin kicking and moving and this vitality. And then the other, you could feel these sort of waves of energy moving out of my body. And I had the opportunity to just sit there and feel this life force of coming into a body and the force of life leaving. And indeed, with the birth, one survived and one lived a couple of days, and two girls, beautiful twin girls, but luckily we had the one, my firstborn. But this intrigued me. And I realized this is an incredible threshold time in terms of birth. the moving from the embryonic fluid, being in utero, from a water being into an air breathing being. Just the whole birth process itself. And that moved me into about 10 years of working with end of life care as well, because I was intrigued with what the transition was from this world into the next. So that sort of marked my beginning of my curiosity, and came across the term liminal later on in my 30s when I was also having an illness. So anyway, I experienced being an in-between, just as Jean was saying. Everything that had been before sort of dissolved, and I was in this sort of, one could describe it like a passageway, a tunnel, in between one world and another, and then slowly coming out, reassembled. Someone has talked about the liminal process as reassembling, because basically you don't die, right? You continue living, but there is a reconfiguration, putting oneself back together again with, as Jean was saying, those wonderful opportunities to let go of all of those aspects of ourselves that have inhibited our gift. And so really it's an opportunity to bring ourselves forward in a more full, natural, authentic way. And I've worked many years now with individuals from a spiritual director, a spiritual counselor's point of view with their life journey. So when people come to me, Jean, they come on retreat, and they may not be in crisis, but they are in a life change. Very often people who come to listen to within, what's next for me, who are coming for a spiritual guidance, spiritual inspiration. It's often something in their life that is changing, and they're seeking that direction. So that's my orientation to it, is more from a spiritual point of view, not so much the psychological. And ultimately, I think it's about our souls. Our souls, how do our souls express? And if there are blockages in our life from that expression, nature has its way of saying, right, you need to take pause and remember who you are, and review your life and review what is calling you, really. That's going to have meaning, that's going to have purpose, that's going to have life vitality and force. And so I've watched hundreds of people over these years, thousands probably, go through the retreat process and come out the other end inspired and clear and take a new direction in their life. So I could say a lot more, but this is a conversation. So yeah, how did you come to understand this? And why do you then use this as such a core part of what your message is? I'm just curious, Jean, what sparked your own journey?
Well, in listening to you talk about the retreat phase in which you meet people, and actually that, since I'm no longer on the front lines of being an active psychiatrist with people in major crises, I'm doing long-term work with people. And it is like it's like coming in to do the pause, to do the retreat, to bring in what was important during the week to share with me, and the dreams that came up to share with, and to really do what you are talking about, but in a different location. So the whole idea of going for a retreat and taking time out is what people do when they make a commitment to do an analysis to grow.
Mhm.
So that was one thought of just sort of weaving it in. The other had to do with, oh yes, I remember the business about being pregnant and delivery. And I also was at the other end first, long before I
Were.
had the experience personally through my own body, because as an intern at LA County Hospital, I delivered I love to deliver babies, actually. And there was a pause of time when a woman is in labor. Ordinary time just doesn't matter. It is when the contractions are coming, what's happening to the baby, and you just are there through the time of delivery, and you step out of ordinary time into liminal time. Applies to that. And then I was thinking about how the baby's experience from being, as you mentioned, there the baby is floating in the amniotic fluid, and then suddenly crisis, meaning this wonderful container that held me starts to squeeze me, and I'm getting pushed, and I'm going under the pubic bone of my mother. And that's when danger, this is the threshold to coming out into the world. And it is the most dangerous time in pregnancy, because the pubic bone of the mother, the birth passage is under the bone into the world. And what if you're too big a baby, or the mother's pelvic bone structure is too small? Without a C-section at that time, mother or child or both are in a medical crisis. Then the baby goes, but assuming that it goes pretty ordinarily, it's still not an easy passage to be cramped down on until you're pushed out, and then you wail. I mean, naturally you do if you're a baby. It was nice inside. Now the cry and being wiped off, and you're in this new world with a bright light on you, because you always in the delivery room, you've got this light on, and here you are. I mean, what an abrupt beginning we all have, to say nothing about being totally dependent on who takes care of us from that point on. So
Exactly. And that experience of being in the liminal place doesn't really shift until the baby's in arms bonding to the next container.
that's true. That's true.
And then there is a solidification of that whole process. I'm out of the liminal. I'm out of the birth process. I am now in arms. And if there's love and there are parenting figures who bond with that child, there is an organic solidification of the next stage of development of our life. And I think the template of this whole birth process is one way to understand our liminal experiences, our transition experiences in life.
That is so true.
Yeah.
But it always, that whole thing about how lots of little ones come into not that warm and comfortable in the arms of the mother. And so the struggle, I mean, we grow through the struggles that we encounter. And that when there's an energy field, true energy field between the mother and child, the mother also feels like, I can remember nursing my daughter in the middle of the night, and it was like feeling like we were together in this container. And the archetype, the Madonna and child in that moment was a spiritual experience for the mother as well as a child, I feel. At any rate, it was that moment. Daytime was quite different. And you were I was blessed by not having a baby with colic. You know, the whole experience is so varied.
And what's interesting, I watched my son-in-law. My daughter had an emergency situation in which the child, our grandson, would not have made it. So she had a C-section. And it was Micah, the father, who ended up being the first one to hold the child.
Yes.
And I've watched this and I see, given we're having so many C-sections, it's made me wonder how the fathers now are playing a role in that bonding that's quite different than when I gave birth and fathers weren't allowed in the birthing room or weren't allowed to be close to that newborn. And it's just, so it can be a father, it can be a parental figure. That mother archetype can descend, but there's a spiritual, just a grace of that nursing in the night for those mothers who nurse.
Jean, I'd like to just shift the conversation for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to respond to Katherine? I didn't mean to cut you off. Respond to Katherine, if you wanted
Well,
to.
when I gave birth for the first time, it was in a situation, hospital city, where it was happening and fathers were in the delivery room. And one of my friends who was a psychiatrist in residency commented that he had been present for the births of 3 of his 4 children. And there was a natural bonding that happened as the child emerged from the mother. And the 4th child, when he was in the military service, he missed it. And he had to work. He was very aware that there was something that he missed, and the bond with the child, because he wasn't present at that moment, that liminal moment when there must be a space for bonding to happen. And so he consciously worked at bonding with that one child that he was not present at the birth for. And it was probably something in him that he had to work to express, because it just came automatically when he held the baby after it was born, the others. So I just wanted to emphasize that there's something about what fathers are deprived of, that in the last 2 generations of new fathers, there's a growing generation that is coming into adulthood who aren't different than that old model.
So Rosemary, I bet you're going to redirect us to the gifts of liminal space. So why are we talking about birth? And why is this so
I want you
important?
to talk about birth, but I'd really like, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'd really like the bigger birth.
Right.
Of what's happening to the world, of what's happening to the earth. In the beginning of the coronavirus, Jean, you spoke about, I was thinking, because I have a breathing problem and I didn't think the earth was able to breathe. So I found it very interesting that a microbe could enter this entire universe and affect our breathing. And then you went on to say something about it being called a coronavirus, and the corona being the crowning, and you moved on into a whole new discussion of birth in a bigger way. There would have been a new birth environmentally, perhaps a new birth in society's structure, but birth on many levels.
Well, actually, I can move into what you're bringing up right out of this discussion about babies and birthing, and because the word is placenta. While the baby is inside the mother, the placenta brings all the oxygen in and takes away the waste. Then we're born into the world, and the atmosphere of Mother Earth does the very same thing. And one of the things that's happening now in this liminal space globally is that we are in global warming. You know, our particular presidency has just ignored it, forget it. But here we are in this pandemic. And if we live in certain states like California and the West in general, there have been wildfires all over. The atmosphere is contaminated. People are having trouble breathing because it was so filled with you know, I think it is 400,000 or 4 million or some huge number of acres have been burned, and people have trouble breathing. The air gets thick. And normally the atmosphere breathes us. You know, it does the same thing as the placenta, but it comes through the trees that we're burning down. So there's a short thing is too many people, not enough trees, crisis. The crisis of we can't breathe. So this pause, this time in which we are shutting down, and for the first time when it happened over India, there were places in India where they could see the Himalayas for the first time because it was so thick over Delhi and the big cities that you could not see. And they shut down, and for the first time in modern days, the skies over the major cities, some major cities, were clear and you could see from a distance. So this liminal time we are in as a planet has to do with Mother Earth.
Mhm.
And it's, you know, my activism message is, well, there's the synchronicities of a book I wrote in 2011 that was like a neglected child because I moved into other subjects, and it came back to this one because Like a Tree was about how women, trees, and tree people could save the planet. And it has to do with the trees make the oxygen that is the atmosphere in the atmosphere in which we breathe, and it takes away our carbon dioxide. Only we've overwhelmed our own planetary system. So you're right on. It's sort of like weaving strands from so very many places.
And I think, Jean, just building on that, the more we can understand, and your title of this talk, the gifts of liminal space, it will point us in the direction how to use this time wisely, how to use this time as a gift. And this gift is to awaken to the breathing in COVID, the breathing in the atmosphere, the breathing of our own spirits. Spirit is breath. We bring our gift, our essence, our spirit into life, and it breathes. And so it's multi-level, it's multi-dimensional. And the more we can understand about, in my perspective, personal liminal passages, it gives clues to beginning to look around us and go, oh, this is what's happening. This is what's happening in our nation. This is what's happening in different cultures. This is what's happening in different groups who've been oppressed, who have not been able to flower in their fullness. So if we look at liminal passages, and in a sense, if we understand it's natural, the transitions in life bring us, each time we face it, as Jean said, multiple times in a lifetime, it's about moving us into the next stage of our development. It's into maturing, and it's into developing a new capacity or a new aspect of ourselves. So we build the physical body, the emotional body, the mental body, the social body, the vocational body, so on and so on. So the big question is, what capacity, what body are we collectively building as we meet this crisis, as we meet this opportunity? And what are we bonding into? What is the next container that's going to hold the human race? And it is a conscious recognition of Gaia, of the earth, but coming to a new relationship with it in a conscious way. Not, and this is my sense, is that this awakening of life and the interdependence of life, the interconnectedness of all life is, person by person. If we look at all the cells of humanity in the body of humanity, awakening and recognizing there is this incredible maturing that's occurring. And as hard as it is, as we look at our own nation and here in the United States and what we're undergoing, at least we can say people are becoming aware. They are waking up in ways that we were all rather in our little bubbles. We were asleep. We were not conscious. So there's this collective, but there's also, this is triggering so much for individuals right now. And you see that, Jean, and I see that, because as we move into no longer one way and not yet clear what's emerging, we're in this in-between state, and it's triggering a lot of personal liminal passages, liminal experiences. And it's important to understand what's natural about that. It's natural to become disoriented for, as you were saying in the birth process, for time to shift, our sense of time, of coming into a whole different relationship with the present moment, of fluidity. Things are not as clear and set and put together as we were used to. There's a disassembling and a reassembling of our awareness, of our perceptions, of our ability to even think in the same way. For many people, their thoughts are more fluid. And in that is understanding that this is an exquisitely okay natural process that is coded in our cells, it's coded in our soul, it's coded in the way we grow through life. So that's one of the key things that I feel is a premise, is to understand this is a natural process. Yes, there are crisis points we are facing. In a sense, the great pelvic bone we need to emerge through is this, and the ability to breathe. Anyway, I just add that to the conversation as we look at.
I think that a lot of people are afraid when things start to become as they are. Fear can creep in, and it really negatively affects what you can be and do in this in-between time. It always does. Personal crisis, planetary crisis. So there's something about making a conscious effort to hold fear and abeyance and to trust, which means that you've got to remember that part of yourself that has gotten through difficult times before. And remember the trust that we may have had in prayer and meditation, in ways in which we access something that comes to us if we're receptive. That's why the kinds of workshops and retreats you're talking about doing, Katherine, make such good sense. The people know sometimes that they need to get away from their usual environment and need to be able to go to a freer space where they can let in their thoughts and feelings and share it with others that are open to hearing it.
I've heard from many people saying, this is an enforced retreat. I didn't sign up for it, but I'm in it. Help. And Jean, so what happens in a retreat, something breaks through. And that's the key about the gift of the liminal. If you can trust, if you can move through the fear, if you can surrender and let go, you know,
And be supported by people who may be meeting you for the first time, but once you are real and share yourself, something bonds. And there's a trust of being able to talk about your hopes and fears and have it heard and held in a circle.
Yes.
And we're doing this on Zoom. And you know, there are Zoom circles all over now where old friends who haven't had time to talk to one another since their college days, and now they've moved all over the country, and now they're meeting again on Zoom, or family units that have gone all over the place, and now once a week or so they meet each other on Zoom, and no matter the order of the parent or the boss person in charge doesn't work anymore, and everybody has their chance to speak up, even the youngest member of the family, and the circles change. This is the anti-patriarchy movement, the millionth circle. You know, it's how if you meet in circle with a sacred center and nobody has power over and everybody is facing each other, it's not a hierarchical thing. You get used to being able to express what you perceive and what you feel. And what happens is that a true, call it a democracy. You know, we live in a democracy, but people go to work and work in a hierarchy in which you might as well call it something else.
And many family structures are still
Yes.
locked in the habit.
Right.
Those top down, who's in charge. But these, just as you say, these opportunities to connect, these opportunities to find support in new ways, also engender a condition in which insight, inspiration, new vision, new sense of possibility tends to break through. And that's the importance of listening to the dreams, listening and observing the synchronicities. As I often say to individuals or groups I'm working with, bring your observer, bring your witness to the table now, and engage that witness in ways that you've never before. What is happening? Pay attention to the thoughts that are there, maybe looping back to part of your history and picking up threads that have not been fully brought into integration with yourself. Begin to dream and envision what's possible for yourself in the future. And as we do this individually, we also are now being asked to do this on behalf of the world. I don't know if you remember Robert Mueller, who was Under Secretary General for the United Nations for under 5 generals. And he started something called the Bench of Dreams. And his practice was every day you sit down on a particular place, on your land, on your property, in your closet. It's the only place you can go that's quiet. And you sit and you think of something that you would want to see for the world. Dream. This is how education should be. This is how I'd like to see families. This is how I'd like to see gardens planted. Whatever it might be, have an idea on behalf of the world. Envision a possibility. Write it down. And if you're outside, pick up 2 stones. Put one in your pocket so you won't forget that vision, and put another one on the earth so the earth won't forget. But the practice behind this is that you're engaging a part of yourself, which I think begins to grow in liminal space. Becoming aware of potential, of what's wanting to come into form. So that's where the birth process.
You bring up Robert Mueller, and he envisioned and was behind the University of Peace in
Yes.
Costa Rica. And the first big peace conference was held in Costa Rica, where the Dalai Lama spoke, and where a number of us showed up and were affected by it. So you never know what leads one thing to another and impacts. And that being in Costa Rica, I brought there, and Costa Rica was there because Eleanor Dedeker, who has been a global mother behind the scenes for me, for you, Katherine, the influence that touches and has. And so when I think about, I don't know who's tuning into this conversation we're having. I don't know why we are talking about, we're going off in this direction. I don't know why you brought up Robert Mueller, but maybe you did, because it is just what somebody in this audience really needs to spark or to blow on the spark. I just love the spontaneity of being able to, as I say, like blow dandelion seeds out over the internet and know that if there's fertile soil out there somewhere, that synchronicity will take it there. Maybe right now, maybe because it'll be heard a year from now, because things are recorded these days. Who knows?
Who knows?
But it's
But
fun.
people have a lot of time on their hands, or many people. Some are working more than ever because they have 5 kids in the house and both parents are working full time, and it's not an easy time. But there are also many, many people who have more space. They are in the pause, and they can choose to go and just watch the news or put on movies, or they can also choose to imagine and dream, and then see what begins to grow within themselves that might move them into who knows what. And we've seen this over the years. And Rosemary, we didn't mention that the 3 of us have been a part of the Million Circle group for almost 20 years now. And so we have formed a connection through that of sharing circle together. We've seen what happens in circle when not just the voice of being able to speak oneself, but it helps us grow. We grow each other through the listening, through our ability to be in that shared sacred place together. And then we see people take on direction. I love the Canadian group that we have a few Canadian members. They actually got someone elected to Parliament. She's now a major leader at the national level. And she was just a woman in circle. So we have seen so many of these stories. So we don't know what in this precious, precious pause time, in what we imagine, in what's growing within us, where that might lead on behalf of our world.
Linda Merriman, who's a member of the Million Circle in Hawaii, has worked on the website millioncircle.org, and now it's had a whole new breath of life, and principles and how to do circle and whatever are there. And Circles with the Sacred Center calls upon the self inside of ourselves, divinity, as anyone can conceptualize it, the great mystery, and just to have it in the center of the circle, and to realize that you are in a sacred circle. It's, it so sustains the people in it, but it also is working on the whole planet. The more there are, until we get to critical mass, tipping point. And at that point, the big vision is that we enter a different planetary culture, that it's no longer patriarchy, it is something else. And I also I picked up when you mentioned the word pause, remembering menopause. Menopause is a particular pause that is, I think, extraordinarily important, that women who have entered in our menopause, gone through it, and are postmenopausal, there is the whole story behind, well, one of the stories behind the whole thing is that in an indigenous culture, it was thought that, you bleed month in, month out, in sync with the moon phases, actually. Usually it's full moon, and you bleed. And you bleed month in and month out until for 9 months you make a baby instead of having a menstruation. And then you don't menstruate until after you've stopped lactating and nursing the baby. And then once that period is over, you're back in bleeding month in and month out. Only in old indigenous tradition, you entered the moon lodge every time you began menses, and that was when you dreamed forth a tribe. So it was a time to withdraw, to phase in, to have dreams, and to pay attention to them. Okay, now what about menopause? We are all in that phase. And this is when the planet needs this generation of post-menopausal women, because we have been through the women's movement and we have been educated. And what the indigenous cultures said, that, you month in, month out, you bleed unless you have a baby, unless you nurse your baby, or until you enter menopause. And at that point, once again, you retain the blood in your body, not to make a baby, not to make milk, but to make wisdom. And this is what, having lived through enough crises, this is a time when the generation who have been in menopause need to find their voice and live into this phase, which is the wise woman phase, or the juicy crone phase. Remember Maiden Mother Crone? But crone always was associated with dried up old crone. Ugh. But think about how to be a juicy crone, which was why I wrote another book called Crones Don't Whine. Concentrated wisdom for juicy women. And
But
you and Rosemary, both of you are juicy. We're all juicy. We've got, anyway.
Well, I was watching on PBS last night on the young global activists, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds from around the world. Man, are they juicy. New generation coming in. The younger folk give me hope. They really do. But I just would say, coming back to understanding the liminal threshold passage we're in, I think it's important just to, from my perspective, and this has helped so many people, is that it really comes in phases, the liminal stage. And with many people who, especially menopausal, but also people triggered by an illness, by a death in the family, something that disrupts their life profoundly, a crisis that brings change. There is a first stage that is sort of a letting go, a dying to what was. And in that are all sorts of the feelings that come: loss, grief, anger, rage, what hasn't happened in my life. It's a very profound and difficult time until that point of acceptance. And then we come into a second stage, of which there is this reassembling, there is this reconfiguration, there's this review, and a profound opportunity for integration, for bringing the parts of ourselves together in a way that we're not able to do when we're in the midst of things. And then the third phase of bringing ourselves back out again into the world with what is new to be offered. And I learned from another psychologist, a Jungian, Edith Sewald, who worked a lot with teenagers. She talked about the most important part of the liminal passage is the third phase. And that third phase is, and she used the image of the young woman or young man leaving the home, going out on their own on the vision quest, and being in the space where they're no longer child, not yet adult. The most important thing that was recognized is when that child, that young man or woman, came back into the community, that they were perceived as the new self, as the no longer child, but the emerging adult. And even symbolically, childhood clothes, bedding, place of sleep would be burned and a new place brought forward. And what Edith shared, which I just struck me so profoundly, she said it's in the witnessing by even just one person in the community of who you are, of what this change has been, that solidifies it. And so I've done a lot of reflection and work with people about coming to find ways that we are able to see each other not as we knew them yesterday or 10 years ago, but as they are now. And this is what happens in psychotherapy and analysis. It's what happens in spiritual direction. It's what happens in circle, is we see each other. And this calls us forth in our fullness. And it's also maybe what we're needing to do with nature and with our earth, is that we're beholding and seeing the beauty of this creation, the exquisite miracle of life on this planet that is nowhere else in this whole cosmos as far as we know. Oh, an opportunity for the preciousness of consciousness and life and the exquisite diversity that is here. And so many people I know now, that's their experience. They're witnessing Earth, they're witnessing nature, they're witnessing their place in such a way that they haven't ever before as adults. Maybe as children we see. So that is shifting our consciousness. That, seeing the trees, coming to recognize, as you were saying, Jean, how we have this life on the planet and how we each are stewards, how we each need to be protectors and fierce in our coming forth at no matter what age we are. And that's sort of what I saw happening in this beautiful PBS documentary with the young people. And it's awakening in almost everyone I'm in touch with. So
it's fascinating to think about the next generation coming along. What's also hard to think about is the generation that's leaving.
yes.
So there is one question in our audience about what about the seniors? This is a very difficult time, it seems, for a lot of seniors that I know, especially those who are ill, because they're all by themselves. There's no one there to help them with that passage. There's no one there to love them or remember with them. We have somehow entered into a time where many are dying by themselves. Many are going through the end of life passage all alone. And how, I'm at a loss.
I
Comfort families in that space or to even talk about it.
I have a more positive attitude about that.
Good.
And that has to do with all of us. When we die, it is like the passage coming into life. We whether we have people around us or not, that passage is the one we go ourselves through and to the other side. And because I have such a strong sense of the other side, and I'm talking to people who have had near-death experiences and who have physiologically died in a sense, and then were brought back to life. But while they were brought back, while they appeared death and people were pounding on their hearts to bring it back, they were off going down and seeing people on the other side that had died before them, who welcomed them. And then there's story after story that just moved my heart, hearing from people, like during the AIDS epidemic, when in a kind of liminal space, because a liminal space you can be not only in your dream life, but in an in-between space. And this was a young, people who were dying of AIDS were young. And so there wasn't a whole bunch of people on the other side. And here this in this moment, he sees a contemporary who died of AIDS before him. And he hears this and sees, I mean, it becomes very real, but then he doesn't believe he has the experience. So he demanded of this spirit person friend, I need you to come back one more time to believe in what you just told me. And then he experienced and he recorded it, and it was heard at his funeral. This fellow came back annoyed and said to him, I have a lot of things to do, but I told you I would be back. And then he left again. And that was played at his memorial service. And he was this activist, angry sort of person who encountered a spirit from the other side that certainly helped him to cross over. And so my sense is that the transition out is into the world that has energy in the form that we can receive it, that helps us to cross over. And so I haven't a sense of being afraid of death. I just want to put it off because I have, as I've been feeling, I still have lots to do here.
Agreed. I think we all have lots to do here. This has been an amazing conversation. We have 2 minutes to the end of the hour, and I want to thank you both so much for your wisdom, your experience, your generosity. I think we are living really in a time of gift in many ways. The gifts we give each other, the gift of time, and the gift of creativity. I think we need to really bravely imagine at this point, think about our dreams, and then do whatever we can do to bring them into reality.
And I just want to add to that, in looping back to those who are struggling, in learning by being alone, breaking through that we are not alone, and that we are held, and that we reach out. We reach out to those we love, and those might be on the other side.
I don't know whether we've left the conversation or the time was up.
The time is just about up. And thank you, Rosemary, for the whole concept and the arrangement. And may this first initiation into this form that you've brought as dandelion seeds to go out over the internet. Thank you.
I am just so grateful to both of you, and perhaps we will continue this in many ways as we move forward. I say goodbye for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. And thank you, everyone who listened.